My name is Chelsea Higgs Wise. I am the Executive Director of Marijuana Justice. I'm so excited for you all to be here with us on CannaHour, February 6th, 2021. It has been quite a 2 weeks since we last came at you. Thank you so much for being flexible last week. The exact time that we are planning CannaHour with Sully Stinson Clay was the exact time that they changed the time for testimony. And if you've been watching General Assembly, you know that things can change in that calendar from moment to moment. So we will actually have Sully on February 20th. So make sure you're joining us then. She has a lot of knowledge and experience up in Maryland, dealing with contracts around cannabis, licensees, and that sort of thing. And what we want to do right now is be able to offer you all some updates of what's been happening right here in Virginia legislation. Now, if you saw the news yesterday, Friday the 5th, then you probably saw on the news everywhere that Virginia passed legalization. And that is true in a way. We are now one step closer to it going to the governor's desk. But I'm going to be really honest with everyone that we have a long way to go. And in that realm, I want to also let everyone know that did not catch the news that Governor Northam extended our General Assembly session by 15 days. So in case you're not aware that Virginia has a short session and a long session, the short session being 30 days, the long session being 45 days, and they alternate every other year. Well, this year, 2021, Virginia is actually on a short General Assembly session. So our session was only supposed to be 30 days. Now, we have some really big bills, including the marijuana legalization one. And so a lot of times what happens in Virginia General Assembly with the short sessions is that the members do decide to vote in an extension and extend it through a special session for these 15 days. Now, the reason why we have a long session and a short session is because the long session where they plan to be there for 45 to 60 days normally, because again, they often then also extend it 15 days, even in a long session. But the long session is intended for us to really focus on the budget that Virginia does every other year. Something else different with Virginia's budget is that we cannot go into debt or a deficit. So while other states across the country, while they're dealing with COVID, are saying that they need to legalize cannabis in order to fund their general fund, in order to make up a lot of the money that they lost. Of course, Virginia has suffered some with the COVID relief, but I'm going to be really honest with everyone that we've had a lot of CARES Act funding and that our budget right now isn't looking as bad because we have to always balance our budget. So as we're talking about legalization of marijuana in the cannabis industry, understand that legalizing marijuana right now and rushing it to have the tax revenues to then supplement what we've lost for COVID should and cannot be the priority reason for legalizing cannabis here in the Commonwealth. Because number one, it's just not our reality that we need it that badly. And number two, it is important that we're going to continue to prioritize and direct these funds and the tax revenues to the communities that have been most impacted by the arrests and the convictions of marijuana related crimes. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, particularly with our guests in just a little bit. But let's get into some of the updates. So we did pass some sort of bill in both the House and the Senate. So both chambers have passed some version of legalization. Now, what does that mean? It means that these two bills, that's House Bill 2312 and Senate Bill 1406, these bills look completely different, y'all. So yes, what we learned yesterday by the floor votes is that the members of the General Assembly in Virginia are motivated to pass legalization. Now, what that industry looks like, what that repeal looks like, what that expungement looks like is all still up in the air to everyone. I want everyone to hear that. So we have no real answers about what our legalization will look like with our policing, with our expungement, with our inclusion, with our definitions and equity. We just still do not know. Okay, so, and everyone's asking me, well, Chelsea, which do you like better? Do you like the House bill or do you like the Senate bill? I've been letting folks know that truly this is a Frankenstein type of process. And so we at Marijuana Justice, as well as our Legalize It Right partners at the ACLU, Justice Forward, and Rise for Youth, we're really looking at this from different parts and different pieces. If you've been following along, you realize that this cannabis legalization bill has been heard in 3 different committees in each chamber. So the marijuana justice team has been working really hard to attend every single committee hearing, every single floor vote, because as you are listening to the debates, and if you tuned in yesterday to the Senate floor debate, then you really got to hear where many of the legislators are when we talk about marijuana. And their narratives are very important to how we are advocating and presenting our recommendations as we're continuing to push our legalization bill to the point that we really need it for day one equity. So really understanding that there's a lot that can still happen, y'all. If you've heard of this word crossover, what that means is that the bill was heard in the House, the bill was heard in the Senate, and now with crossover that they've both passed on the floor, they're going to switch sides. And now the House bill is going to hear the Senate bill, and the Senate bill is going to hear the House bill. And what we've seen in the past is that they'll probably just change it right back to what they decided prior. And at that point, if we still have 2 bills that are very, very different, they go into this thing called conference. Conference is a real scary place, y'all. It's not transparent. It's literally the legislators go into a conference room. Normally, what this process will look like will be the patrons of the bill, another Democrat, since we have the majority, as well as a Republican. So there'll be 3 legislators on each side of the bill, on each House bill, and then 3 senators and legislators on the other side of the bill. And they'll go in a conference room, y'all, and they'll just kind of compromise. That's a really scary place because we cannot influence that conference room. So what our mission is right now, and this after crossover is when they hear these different bills, is that we really need to talk to these legislators about the key priorities that we need right now, which are a lot, but they have to match as much as possible. Because when they go in that conference room and they make that compromise, it's no telling what we're going to lose and who will win in these certain compromises. So we're going to continue to talk to you all, listen to you all. Please DM us, email us, let us know what you're thinking about so that we can continue to push your priorities to the forefront and answer your questions, because we can get really down in the weeds of this. I'm not telling another marijuana joke, y'all. If you've been listening to these floor things, I am sick of the higher weeds, all these marijuana jokes, y'all. It's ridiculous, these legislators. But please know that this can get a little complicated, but if you are down for some of that complication, that nuance, please hit us up because we can definitely talk about it. All right, so here we are now. What's going on with these bills? Well, with marijuana justice, you know that our Legalize It Right campaign has really been about the 3 R's, which is repeal, repair, and reparations. Okay, so the repeal we know is the most important part to ensure that racial disparities in marijuana related arrests do not continue. Chelsea, marijuana is going to be legal. There are not going to be any more arrests. That's a lie. We know that here on this stolen land of the United States of America, so-called, that they're going to always find a way to continue to criminalize us, particularly Black, Latinx, and Indigenous folks, when we are in proximity to this plant. And so in other states that have legalized, when they did not actually repeal the possession of simple possession, or did not repeal the prohibition of a possession up to a certain amount with a small civil penalty, we know that these racial disparities means that, hey, they're going to get this person and arrest them for a marijuana related possession charge because they have a whole lot on them. Or what we've really seen, particularly across the country, is the folks that are getting these charges or these tickets or fines still for marijuana crimes or penalties, even though it's legalized, are folks that are houseless or folks that are living in public housing. And because of the nationwide federal rules, they aren't able to safely consume a lot of their different forms of cannabis within their homes. And so then they have to go outside and then they get a citation for public consumption. So when we talk about legalizing marijuana, there's a point that's happening right here in Virginia, particularly in both sides of the bill, that we need to pay attention to really, really carefully, okay? Particularly around this first R of repeal. And that is the fact that Virginia, when we decided to legalize, whoever wrote these bills went in and took the alcohol law and truly almost just replaced it with the word marijuana. And if we all know that if you have an open container, even if it's a screw on of alcohol, once that lid and that seal is broken and if it's in your vehicle, that is a what? Open container. Well, that's why we're calling this, we have to completely strike this open container of marijuana that they've created. Y'all, the way that they have legislated this law is you could be in your car with your Ziploc bag that was open because you're just traveling from one place to the other. You've already smoked some, but you didn't do it in your car. There's no burnt marijuana in your car, but it is sealed up and it is in your glove compartment. The way that the Virginia proposals are for legalization right now is a officer could stop you for whatever reason. He could come up and say, they could say, hey, you have a green leafy substance on the floor mat of your car. Any green leafy substance, any of it. And he says he sees that. So the reason why that's important is because remember, Virginia just said that the smell of marijuana, the odor of it is no longer a reason to search or seize. So they actually wrote in another way to search and seize Black folks, brown folks in the vehicle, because we know that over 85% of the crimes and charges of marijuana happen in traffic stops. We know the most deadly traffic stops are deadly for Black folks, right? So we know that this idea of traffic stops is a still policing point, and they are going to continue to police it as much as possible. So this green leafy substance, once a cop says that he sees that on your floor, then they have reason to search your car. Once they find that marijuana that's in your glove compartment, that's sealed, unburnt, but your stuff is good. They could probably smell that when they pulled you over, right? I mean, good stuff sometimes has an odor to it. Ain't nothing illegal about having good cannabis on you. But now that he's pulled you over, he smelled it, can't use that excuse, said he saw the green leafy substance, searches your car, finds it locked in your, put it in your glove compartment. And now there's also a presumption piece in this law that says, since they find it on you, any possession of marijuana, there's also a presumption clause that the law enforcement officer can now presume if you have marijuana on you, we can also presume that you are intoxicated. They can say your eyes are red, they can say your speech is blurry, and now not only do you have a possession charge, but you have a what? Because you're in the car. You have a driving while intoxicated. So y'all, when I tell y'all, the way that they have written these laws, I've only gotten the first R, right? But this is a really important one. This is one that even though we're not starting the cannabis industry for until 2024 now, if we don't get this repeal right and start it July 1, then we're not talking about real racial equity and justice, because we need to stop these harms now. And it's this repeal stuff that gets really nuanced in the car and public consumption, public housing. It's when we're seeing folks that have been bearing the brunt of these disparities and marijuana arrests are now going to continue. So these are on both sides of the bill. Also in the House and the Senate side still is a youth piece that we have to really be careful about. If a youth, anyone under the age of 21 is caught in possession of marijuana, that they are forcing them to go to a substance use class. And with this force, because you are now mandated, and the way that the youth system is set up in Virginia, we are now having to mandate youth on probation. So as we are legalizing marijuana, what we are actually now doing is sending our youth into a whole new spiral of this criminal and punishment system. So what we are suggesting to the legislators with this, because we can't just say we don't like it, we also have to feed them real solutions, legislative solutions. For this repeal with the open container law, we're saying to just strike it completely. We already have laws for DUI. So if somebody is driving recklessly, too slow, whatever, you can get a DUI citation. And we do not need to make more new crimes around marijuana, because why? Virginia has already shown us that they do not know how to enforce any marijuana crime equitably or fairly. So creating new ways to now charge people for marijuana is ridiculous. And we know that this is going to continue to enforce policing. And marijuana justice is very, very clear that part of our legalization process should not be to fund police. So those are two. And then as for the youth piece, we want to, instead of forcing them to substance use, we want to change that to they shall go to substance use to they may go to substance use. So what that does, it does still put them in front of a judge, and the judge has discretionary to just say, hey, do you just get this ticket, or now are you mandated to go and go through the process of this? It's not the best that we can do. We still don't want, youth being delinquents. We're still really pushing to make that better, but right now that's what we need to stop. So that's the repeal. I'm going to check the text really quickly to make sure you all don't have any questions. Someone has said it's such a shame, the length that they go to hurt people. It really is true. We have to remind everyone that Virginia is the oldest legislative body in this country. So we have the most experience of how to oppress Black and brown folks and how to recreate this cycle to ensure any progress that we make, that we create other legislative priorities to now continue to keep us in this cycle to push back. So we are truly here at Marijuana Justice to be a line of defense there. Going on to the second R, we're going to be quick on these other ones, is the repair is the expungement. Okay, so expungement, really big news that the House has come in with an automatic expungement piece. The Senate is also looking at some expungement pieces. Again, they do not match. What we are really excited about is that the proposals have gone further now to expunge records to include paraphernalia, as well as some possession with intention to distribute. So that was something that we actually picked up and pushed hard from the information from Akele that we'll hear from in just a little bit out of their work out in Illinois, but really understanding that we had to have some kind of automatic expungement or at least petition process, which we do not like, but something for folks with the distribution charge with it. The expungement will not go far enough, y'all. I also want to remind everybody that for the social equity program that I'll talk a little bit about, you have to be eligible for expungement to qualify for social equity license. What does that mean? It means that the further we go with expungements, the more people will be able to be included. So right now, if we were only expunging misdemeanors, that means no one with a felony would be able to be involved in this. And right now, I could go on and for days of this, y'all, but there's a moral turpitude piece in there about it just looks at like any bad conduct, any crimes would be taken into consideration with these licenses. And so we're still really pushing for these pieces around why we need free, far-reaching, and fair expungements. Now, there's going to be some trickiness with this expungements. I want everyone to hear this really clearly. Day one equity, if we are going to be involved in this market, when it comes out, an estimation of 2024, is that we had to also ensure that our social equity applicants and licensees are ready to open their doors and participate day one. Now, what I just told you all is that these social equity licenses right now are majority supposed to be going to folks with these past convictions. And the way that they usually allocate licenses is there's a scoring system. Well, because Virginia does not have real expungement, and because we're just now creating an automatic expungement process, now Virginia is saying that it's going to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to actually create an automatic expungement process. So that means that people that qualify for automatic expungement might not actually have their records automatically expunged in time to apply for these social equity licenses. So that means that now that the General Assembly has also created another criteria that says if you graduated from a Virginia HBCU, you can qualify for a social equity license. You don't have to have a past criminal record. But because they created what I call it a loophole, it might sound really, really good for HBCU graduates. But what it actually does is it creates a way for these social equity licenses to go to people that actually had no direct impact from the convictions and the arrests. And that's not actually what these social equity licenses are for, right? So if we're not expunging records in time, then we've actually created another loophole to where the first round of social equity licensees might just go to HBCU graduates because of the rest of the applicants are still waiting on their records to be expunged, and they couldn't qualify with a higher score because of the way that we're still considering past convictions. That's a lot, right? It's a lot, but I wanted to put that out there, just the way the timing that we have to watch each part of this bill to ensure that our folks are actually included in day one. I'm reading a comment in there that says the school to prison pipeline is real. Passing a joint to a friend who says, hey, can I hit that? That's called distribution in VA. Thank you for bringing that up. That's something that we've talked a lot about, is what's going to happen if a 21-year-old passes a doobie to a 19-year-old. Tell my age, call it a doobie. What does that mean? Is that distribution? Is that a felony? So it's these nuances of, especially now that we've increased the smoking tobacco age to 21, that we're really trying to look out for. And our answer to that is just decrim it and less penalties as possible. If we're legalizing, why are we creating all these penalties and crimes and consequences? I'm going to move on really quickly, finally, to the reparations piece. We are still really looking to make sure that the tax revenue percentages is 70% of tax revenues goes to that reinvestment fund. We're excited about the reinvestment fund. We want to make sure that it's funded equitably. We want to make sure that these medical dispensaries are creating having the fee that will direct monies to the social equity incubator and this equity fund, so that the social equity licensees can have some monies to be granted with their loans. So again, trying to plan so that folks are set up, resourced, and giving not just the keys, but the whole house on day one of equity, of legalization. So we're still really looking at how to ensure that social equities are funded, those licenses are funded, as well as we're asking that 50% of all licenses that they want to do, y'all, should be social equity licenses. Why is that so important? Well, if we really want to keep this Virginia-owned cannabis, there is nothing else in the language that says it has to be owned by Virginians for you to have a license. So multi-state operators can come on in, they can get their license, but the only people that are required to live in Virginia are social equity applicants. So if 50% of them are social equity, that means that 50% of Virginia of cannabis in Virginia is owned by Virginians. It's also important to know that we are still really pushing hard for there to be another tier of licenses to be written into the legislation. You've probably heard us a lot talking about this tier of micro licenses. This is another tier besides the main one of the four, of the cultivation, the manufacturing, the wholesale, and the retail. They also have the testing. But then this is another tier of micro business licenses that would be able to vertically integrate. You've also probably heard that the House did ban vertical integration. The Senate has placed some high fees on it, but we're going to push to ban it vertically at the top tier, but allowing these micro business tiers to vertically integrate and to be able to grow and expand. Now, these micro business licenses and certifications really are looking more towards like a SWAM model. If you haven't heard of SWAM, it's small business, women owned, minority owned. So again, these small entrepreneurs, small growers, businesses are able to have an entry point. This would be something new, but if you are from Virginia and you know Virginia well, that we love craft breweries, we love craft wine. So why can't we have something like this craft cannabis that's locally grown, homegrown, and owned? And then finally, something I want to end with before I bring in Akele is really talking about our definitions for social equity, as far as defining what does it mean to be from a disproportionately impacted area. Right now in the law, it just says that the board will be able to decide, which areas in Virginia were disproportionately impacted. So we really believe that there should be some firm language around that. And finally, how do we define the social equity applicant? I just mentioned to you that right now they put in a provision that says that you could graduate as a HBCU graduate from a Virginia school and qualify. So how are we truly defining the person that should be receiving the benefits, the monetary benefits, the supportive benefits of a social equity license? So that is the rundown of where we are, the 3 R's, really pushing hard for repeal, continuing to push for more expungements soon too as well. And then the reparations piece, number 1, making sure we get 70% of that tax revenue. Right now, they're only trying to give us 30. And ensuring that we have entryway for small businesses and really, really, really tightening up our definitions of social equity. So I got a question in the chat. Where would a consumption lounge fall in licensing categories? Is that micro license? That's a really good question. So the initial bills really try to include places and cafes and those types of consumption lounges. That was something that both sides took out pretty quickly. They're really talking about because it's still COVID. But I think that that's going to be something that will be harder for Virginia to accept cannabis lounges. It could definitely be something the micro license as well. And these are the types of conversations that we could talk about is what are the options for licenses to diversify the license, not to just be your typical, the very standard ones that I mentioned before. So that's a really good question. I'd also like to put out there, remind folks that places like Massachusetts have started to do their program of delivery, and their first 3 years of delivery will be only for social equity applicants and licensees. And those applicants and licensees for the delivery licenses do not have to have a storefront. So that's another great way. You just have a warehouse of supplies, but you don't have to already have a retail. Some states that are looking at delivery, you have to have a retail store in order to do that. And that's a lot of money that some folks like smaller legacy industry entrepreneurs will not be able to access. So this is another way to bring folks that have been doing the legacy market. If you've been delivering, this could be a way for us to get our folks involved at a maybe smaller level, but still get their coin. So if there aren't any more questions, I've been able to ramble a lot and keep everyone updated. If you have questions as we go, just continue to please drop those in the chat. And I am going to now, is this a classism issue? Before I do, you caught me right in time with this question. Yeah, the question in the chat is, what about Black folks who couldn't attend HBCUs? Isn't that a classism issue? This is the exact point. So it's actually, per data, shows that Black folks that graduate from an HBCU end up with over 30% more of the financial income stability than Black folks that graduate from a PWI. When you graduate from an HBCU, there's a whole network of access that you have that you don't have at PWI. I know my particular experience, I couldn't afford to go to HBCU because the PWI gave me a whole ride. So it is a real conversation of why, again, maybe we should consider this HBCU piece in there, and also understanding that a lot of social equity programs are still in litigation and talking about, who really deserves this, who's part of the pool of social equity. And we think a lot of the folks that are putting their brains on this think that this HBCU piece could go to court and hold up the social equity program from being able to participate, because it does not seem like it fits within the social equity realm of the intention. So it is a very good question, and this is not something that we would agree to. So thank you for that question. Really, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and invite Akele on in. Akele Parnell, come on in and join us.
All right, trying to get my video to turn on. I think it's saying you might need to turn it on, or somebody on your end.
Tech help, tech help. All right, we're gonna keep working on Akele's video.
Yeah, we can go, we can just talk.
We'll just talk. So welcome, thank you so much for being here. So tell everybody where you're zooming in from.
Yeah, so I'm zooming in from Chicago, Illinois. And so just for background, I work with the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition and Chicago NORML, which are two leading social equity advocacy organizations in Chicago. So I come to this work from the perspective of community organizations like that, who are predominantly made up of Black and brown folks from communities that have been devastated by the war on drugs. And so it's from that perspective that I can sort of talk about what's gone wrong with the social equity program and legalization in Illinois, and what we need to do to create a more equitable Illinois cannabis industry. And then on top of that, I also started out in the industry working for an MSO. That's, the only way you can work in the industry in Illinois. So that's how I initially got involved in the regulated cannabis industry. And so had that perspective too.
All right, so quite some history there. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into this legalization fight in Illinois.
Yeah, so it started back before legalization was clearly on the horizon. We knew that Illinois was going to go rec at some point, but didn't necessarily know when. And so I got involved in sort of regulated like cannabis industry work in the very beginning of 2018, like January 2018. So before that, I was just an attorney in private practice. I'd always been, interested in the cannabis industry. I come from a community, harmed by the war on drugs and friends that that I grew up with and all that stuff, involved in lots of street level violence, victims of street violence, stuff like that, family and all that. And so, I'd always been around the plan and all that stuff, even, up through college and all that, but didn't really see Chicago in particular as a place where there's an opportunity to be involved in a regulated market. I thought that you had to go to California or Colorado or something like that. And so I was working at a law firm, and then someone just sent me an email and was like, "Hey, are you interested in joining this cannabis company? It's a fast-growing company. It's based in Chicago." I was like, "Cannabis company based in Chicago? What are you talking about?" Like, I didn't know anything about the medical market, period, or the regulated stuff. And so I was like, "Sure, I'm interested." There was sort of going to be like the social equity bent and stuff like that. And so I joined. And so immediately the first thing that I noticed, and I sort of figured it was going to be like this because Colorado had passed rec, and I think California was about to. I knew that it was going to be a mostly white industry, but I was hoping to see more diversity. As soon as I got in there, that was the first thing I noticed. It was just all white people for the most part, or certainly not Black people, and not very many Latinx folks. And so, I was like, okay, well, where are the Black people in the industry? And so I found Chicago Normal. And Chicago Normal, unlike maybe National Normal and other normal organizations, is predominantly Black and brown organizers. I mean, it's like 95%, and the focus is on social equity. And so I got involved with them and just started, organizing with them and looking for ways to create pathways to entry into the regulated cannabis industry for Black and brown folks. And then there started to be talk about a recreational bill, and then that's when the real fight for social equity sort of arose in Illinois. And then that's when I started, getting involved with them in the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition, and sort of working to make sure that whatever legislation was proposed, whatever social equity framework we came up with could be as good as possible. Things moved really fast, and I don't think it's a secret for anybody that sort of paid attention to anything that's going on in Illinois. It hasn't gone as planned. Um, we did make some, some pretty big undertakings to make Illinois more socially equitable than a lot of other states. Most of the social equity programs in other states, at least initially, were seen as failures. Definitely shout out to Oakland because they've made a ton of progress, and right now I probably have the most equitable market. But Illinois, this was going to be a state level program as opposed to a city based, municipality based sort of thing. And so it's just like a lot more stakeholders at play, and you got all the hate to stereotype people, but the downstate folks that tend to be more red and don't necessarily care about all the social equity talk. And so we knew there was going to be some sort of compromise or something we're going to have to do. So actually, I think it's kind of a good reference point for Virginia because of the political mix. And so that's the thing you have to think about when it comes to generally more progressive states like a New York or a California, let alone a Oakland. When you're at a state level thing, like in a state with a bunch of red in it, you're not going to get the same sort of stuff. That's how politics work.
Right. So tell us a little bit about what the lessons you learned that you all learned, organizing, because Illinois had a lot of hope for social equity, and kind of tell us a little bit about what the actual outcome as the rollout has happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely a big organizing effort and a huge push. And, I think that had we not done all that, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are. I think one of the sort of marquee accomplishments of our legalization effort was setting aside 25% of roughly 25% of all cannabis tax revenue to a reinvestment program that's going to go to communities most harmed by the war on drugs. And I mean, it's not perfect yet, but I mean, it's no other state had done anything like that. So that was a good blueprint. And initially, we did design this framework where the scoring framework where the only people who were going to win licenses going forward, at least initially, were going to be social equity folks. Now, of course, the devil is always in the details. And it's like, okay, well, when is that going to happen? What is social equity going to mean in Illinois? And that's where things got a little murky. And then in addition, the timeline. And so, for Virginia, one big lesson we learned in Illinois is that if you give the existing medical operators, which are always almost going to be predominantly white, wealthy folks, sort of first crack at recreational sales, that's just going to be a huge advantage. And you're already sort of shooting yourself in the foot and undermining your goals to create equity because, you do have this first mover, second mover, whatever advantages. And, we would often hear in Illinois that, well, equity, the fight for equity is a marathon and not a sprint. And that's absolutely true. But, if you and I are running a marathon, it can be a 15-hour marathon. But if you start 5 hours ahead of me, you're going to win almost certainly. I mean, that's just how it's going to be. And I'm going to lose. And so that's sort of one of the big challenges you face. And then, of course, when, we tried to roll out the first round of dispensary licenses, we didn't see the amount of equity that we wanted to, in part because there were loopholes in our framework, which some folks, tried to blow the horn and sound the alarm, initially when the bill was first proposed, when it first passed. And, I did a little bit, I probably should have been a little louder about it, but, and some other organizers, but, there was definitely this pressure to go ahead and legalize it. If we can get it, let's just go ahead and do it. It felt like there was a short window to do it. And so we did. And then with expungements, which is another, really important component of social justice framework for legalization, it's good that we have automatic expungements, but the limits are so low that if you were actually like involved in the illicit market for the most part and you got arrested, you're not getting that record expunged. It's for like 30 grams or less automatic expungement, mostly just possession. I mean, and then it's also just arrest. It's not conviction. So if you were convicted, you still have to go through the regular expungement process and all that. And, if you got a felony, that's a whole other, and that's not changing. If you're in jail or in prison for cannabis offenses, like, you were like, quote unquote, a drug dealer, you're not getting out. None of that is changing. And so, all the excitement around expungements needs to be tempered with the reality that, we're really talking about the folks that have really been crushed under the system of mass incarceration, and exploitation. Like legalization, the initial legalization efforts usually isn't going to even affect them because their convictions and arrests and all that usually aren't going to be included in what's going to be expunged or sealed. And so there's got to be a lot of fight and push on that.
Right. And you mentioned that the first round dispensaries weren't as equitable. Can you describe a little bit, were Black folks involved? What did that look like for the first round?
Yeah, I mean, so there was definitely a lot of excitement and a lot of people applied. We had like 4,000 applications or applicants or something like that, for 75 licenses. And so the first round was going to be, the way the point structure was set up, there were like 250 points available. 20% of the total points were going to be allocated to social equity applicants. We weren't sure how the application was going to be scored, but we knew that there's going to be that framework. There was also a certain amount of points for veterans, which was a kind of a sleeper spoiler, which people didn't really realize was going to make or break the whole process until the end. And then, the application fees were relatively low. So like $4,000, $2,000 if you're a social equity applicant and made less than a certain amount. And so it was relatively accessible application process relative to others. And so, tons of folks put their applications in. And then when the results came back, the initial results, these aren't the final ones, but the initial scoring results came back, it was 21 teams, tons of overlap in ownership between the different teams. So it's really less than 21 teams, but it was 21 teams ended up winning the right to go into a lottery for those 75 licenses because they all sort of had these perfect scores, which people didn't anticipate. So if you didn't get every single point you could possibly get in the application process, you didn't even have a shot. And the real spoiler in that is that you also had to be a majority veteran-owned company in order to get all the points. And so this was a social equity program. It's not a veteran program, and we, love our veterans, want them to get, a fair shot at everything, but this was not, they were not disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. This is not what this is about.
Right.
It's about social equity in Black and brown folks. So.
Right. Okay. So that was definitely a loophole, and to let folks know that we're worried about the same HBCU. So now you've had kind of heard Akele talk about where that process got them, and it was a little bit of a sleeper, but ended up coming out with a really terrible output. That's the same type of things that we're wondering with this HBCU graduate. And we can go as far as to say that, white folks go to HBCU too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is another application. Could you talk a little bit about the way that Illinois is defining these impacted areas from the war on drugs?
Yeah, that's another huge issue. And so just for context, so we had basically three categories of social equity applicants. One is if you lived in a disproportionately impacted area, and I'll talk about what that means, for 5 of the last 10 years, not long enough. That gets into gentrification, all this stuff, which is an issue. So I'll come back to that. The second is, if you had an arrest, just an arrest or a conviction for a minor cannabis offense, so usually like 30 grams or less, or possession of less than 500, then you could qualify as a social equity applicant. And again, that could be a George Bush. I mean, he was right. He got arrested for cocaine and all this other stuff. You could be a rich white kid, and there are some of those who got arrested, not even convicted, just arrested, social equity applicants. Another big loophole. And then the last one is if someone just committed to hire 51% of their employees from either of those two categories. So again, you could be social equity and be a rich white kid. And so actually you could be the parent of a rich white kid who got arrested, and the parent is a social equity applicant. So anyway, so when we saw the results, we saw a lot of that. And so, in terms of how we determine, disproportionately impacted area, there was a lot that went into that. And the real challenge, the reason we use that criteria is because, basically the Supreme Court over the past 20, 30 years has been attacking affirmative action programs. And so they made it so you can't usually explicitly say, we're going to provide preferences to Black and brown people, even though those are the people targeted under the war on drugs. So you have these race-specific harms, and then the Republicans on the Supreme Court have tied our hands, so you can't have race-specific solutions. It's insane, makes no sense, but they won the election, so they get to decide these court decisions that have these impacts. And so we decided that we're going to have these disproportionately impacted areas because there's a sort of as a proxy for race, as I interpret it, because for the most part, these areas are predominantly Black and brown. They are, vast majority of them. That's where the majority of the arrests were, which is one criteria they used. Income, the amount of children on free and reduced lunch, gun violence, things that do correlate highly with race. Problem is that you only had to live there for 5 of the past 10 years. And especially in highly gentrified areas, like a lot of Latinx neighborhoods in Chicago, there's tons of, white hipsters in there, and they're not, it just is what it is. That's gentrification. And they've been there for 5, 10 of the last however many years. And so you had them. I mean, I know people who are like corporate white attorneys at big firms who lived in these communities and are social equity applicants. So there's another big loophole. And it's like, how do you carve those folks out?
Right. So that's what I was going to ask. So that language of 3 to 5 years for us that had to live there from the last 3 to 5 years is also in there. When you're talking about these years and fighting gentrification, I have what I think would make sense, but what are you all saying or recommending to legislators around these years of where someone lived, or are you making any recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to move it to at least 10, which still, gentrification has been happening for a while, so it doesn't exclude everybody, but it definitely cuts down a lot, makes it a lot harder for folks to do that. I think that it needs to be 10 of the last 20, or maybe even 30, because you have a lot of folks that are disproportionately impacted. Like I know friends that didn't qualify as social equity applicants who grew up in the hood, like with parents that have been incarcerated for 20, 30 years, friends that have been murdered, all kinds of stuff. Like people we know are harmed by the war on drugs. They're not social equity applicants, but there's a hipster that lived in such and such neighborhood. He's social equity. That's insane. So I think, if say that person moved away and went to college, well, they haven't lived in that disproportionately impacted neighborhood because they don't live with their mom anymore. And so now they're not a social equity applicant. That's insane. So I think they do need to make at least 10 of the last 20, or maybe you consider 30 in order to capture some folks that are impacted that don't live in those communities anymore, and also to ensure that, just people that just moved into the neighborhood because it's cheap aren't social equity applicants.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So my question is with that language is, so what happens in 5 years when 3 to 5 years ago is now 10 years ago, but our language still says 3 to 5 years ago?
Mhm.
So for me, I'm actually been wondering, should we be able to put like actual dates in? Since a lot of our language here in Virginia, they have dates of when these arrests particularly started skyrocketing. And I don't know. So I'm literally just brainstorming with you right now with everyone else too. But instead of putting the last X amount of years, actually writing in the years so that this piece of legislation could stand for the next 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you would have to do something like that, like put a tail on there, or whatever you might call it. And then I think one thing that we're going to do is that our categories of disproportionately impacted areas are going to be reassessed every, so many years and stuff. So I think those are
Okay,
sort of two things you could think about
thank
doing.
you.
But that's a good point. You don't want to just have it like, moving forward, because gentrification is going to increase, and it's
Yeah.
increasing everywhere. So
Right, right. Okay, but that's a really good point about ensuring a certain amount of reassessment from the boards that, because as of right now, everyone in Virginia, the board that would be giving out the licenses are actually the ones that would create the definitions for the impacted areas. That's not something that the legislation is doing right now. We think that they should. We have the data per district, per municipality about these arrests and convictions and the disproportionalities. So that could be something that we really are able to measure pretty well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, we had a similar thing. So we have an R3, we have an R3 board that sort of figures that out for where the funding goes, and in terms of grant funding and all that, from the 25%. And then we also have the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, who does the sort of R3, not the R3, the disproportionately impacted area assessment. And so, yeah, they're sort of tasked with updating that and all that. So similar.
that makes sense. So tell us now that you all have passed legalization and it looks like Virginia is really motivated to pass something, what any advice to give to us here in the Commonwealth in the South, what to prepare for after they pass legalization?
Yeah, figure out the timeline and who's going to get the first shot at recreational sales, and then fight that as much as possible. They're going to try to give it to the medical operators for a lot of different reasons. That's giving them a huge advantage. Definitely fight on that. And then when they do decide to come up with a framework for new licenses in their social equity framework, as soon as that legislation comes out, like, folks gotta be on it. That's the thing with Illinois, is that people didn't really read the bill because they're just so excited we're legalizing it. And it is long, and most people aren't lawyers, so I get it, until after it was passed. But then when you're complaining about something after it's passed, it's like, it's so hard to change it, and folks don't like going back, how politicians are. So definitely watch out for what's in the proposed bills. There's a ton of work, but it's so worth it. Figure out what the scoring process is going to look like, social equity framework, and try to figure out all the different holes and ways it can be abused. Ensure that there are application caps, like the number. That's a big thing that we saw in Illinois, is that, the sort of well-financed, tended to be predominantly white, back, rich, people just submitted like 1,000 applications, some absurd number of applications. And obviously, a regular social equity applicant can't do that at $2,000, $4,000 a pop. Plus, all the consultants and everything else you have to pay to submit the application. People are spending like 100K, 200K to submit just a few applications. And so there needs to be a cap on the number of not only applications that an applicant entity can submit, but like a person can have ownership in. It's got to be down to the individual owners, because they'll, I was a corporate attorney. I know all the games and tricks they play. So you can be like, 5 different applicants. And you'll think that those are different people, but if they're all owned by the same people, that's the same person. It's different for technical purposes. And so you need apps on that. I mean, you need caps on the actual, like what they call in Illinois, principal officers. So like the owners of these entities. Like, you can't say you and I want to submit an application for dispensary. We can't own more than 3, regardless if we apply with 3 different entities or 1. There needs to be caps on that. Because this is a wealth building opportunity, not a lottery for a handful of Black folks or brown folks.
That's a really, really good point that we have not caught. So thank you for that. You just taught us something.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't catch that either. So until it was too late. So that's an important one. And then cultivation. A lot of folks get really focused on the dispensaries because that's the consumer facing and all that. But like the battle of the brands and where this industry is going to go, a lot of it is going to depend on the product and like who's making it and what is the product. It's like do you want to own Nike or do you want to own Foot Locker sort of thing. And so, in Illinois, no new cultivation licenses have been issued. And so the existing operators are going to have a monopoly on cultivation, especially large scale cultivation. They still do and will for a long time. And so they're going to give us smaller cultivation licenses, which are sort of shitty business models, in my opinion. And so that's another big one. The industry will fight you over that one for sure. And so watch out for that. And then, of course, what's the scoring going to be like? Is it going to be like, are all the exhibits going to be scored on a binary basis? Like you get all the points, you get none of the points, or is it going to be a sort of traditional thing? And so that's why we sort of ended up in the situation we're in, because a lot of the exhibits were just like, if you're social equity, you get all the points from that. It doesn't matter if you're more socially equitable or less socially equitable, a lot of other things. It was just all or nothing. And so it's easy, not easy, but for certain folks, it was easy to just get all the points and then they had perfect score, and then we just kind of ended up with a mess.
Okay, wow. These are really great. I'm glad that we were able to schedule this too. Now you're actually helping us with the bill. So this is really exciting. Thank you for that. I want to say we've got just a couple minutes. I want to be really respectful of people's time. How can folks get in contact with you to maybe ask you more questions or continue to follow the work that's happening in Illinois?
Yeah, for sure. They can follow Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition. So they're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Canna Equity IL. And so they have meetings every Thursday at 6 o'clock. And so you can join those and we talk through these issues, talk about what's going on in Illinois. We have, legal experts on like business licensing and industry, which is like myself. And then we have others who are like experts on criminal law and expungements. We have community folks, we have applicants, industry folks, all that. So that's a great way to learn. And then also Chicago Normal. So I think it's just Chicago Normal, or you should Google it or whatever. You'll find it on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook.
Cool. Yeah, I will say that for everyone kind of watching, Virginia Normal is very different than Chicago Normal. Chicago Normal has actually taught me a lot as well, just kind of stalking them on the digital worlds. But here in Virginia, Normal is very connected to the medical industry for whatever reason or another. But we are really excited to have you here, Akele, and thank you so much for sharing that information. I have a feeling we will be in contact, and for everyone that's kind of following this and understanding that this is why we have to talk to people outside of Virginia. And if you know anything about Virginia politics, they don't like to take advice from outside of the Commonwealth. So this is an opportunity for us to create something brand new with new opportunities, and we can't do that with minds that are still in the old Virginia, right? So this is really exciting to have you on here, Akele. I saw some other questions in the chat. I'm going to just kind of quickly talk about, I saw the SWAM issue. What is the process to get that going? Very good question. We need your help to help us push these legislators to include a micro business license tier. And that way we can create these certifications for that. So when we're talking about those opportunities like the SWAM model, that's when we're talking about the micro businesses. So continuing to put out those calls for emails, phone calls, and that sort of thing. And the next couple of weeks as we're going through legislation, as Akele said, doing it after they pass it is just going to be a bit too far gone, too late. White women as minorities, yes, we know that happens all over Virginia, and real estate is that a lot of men get their white woman wife on there, and as a woman, you'd be able to qualify. So this is part of the micro license conversation that we can continue to have, and why it's very important that we have micro business licenses separate from social equity. These are not the same, and for these reasons, right? Talking a little bit about home grow and personal cultivation. Right now, it is only at 4 plants. We were really pushing up to 12 at least. But this is something right now that we are all still also pushing for July 1. We should be able to have some type of personal cultivation for that social equity. And the point of this for us with home grow is yes, for personal access, but number one, so that we're not policed for having it on us. And if these laws are repealed around that, then that does offer us some personal safety. So it might not be enough to grow a whole business out of it or do what you want to do, but this is the point right now, is to stop the harm. And that's what we are really pushing there. I did drop in a link to, there's some legal studies and conversations out there talking about precedent for having preference in race and gender in the cannabis industry. Akele talked about the Supreme Court not being able, restricting us in laws from saying the word Black. And one of those laws came out of Richmond, Virginia. And so that is honestly why we might actually see the word HBCU in here, because that's how a lot of legislators put the word Black in when they can't say it. Doesn't make a lot of sense with this? Maybe not, but we got the word Black in there. Whew, politics is something else, y'all. And just continuing to make sure that you follow Akele, make sure that you're registered for next week. So excited for next week is Jessica Gonzalez out of New Jersey to help us follow up with what's happening in New Jersey. Their governor has completely stalled everything that they worked so hard on from the last year. And Jessica is also another lawyer, cannabis lawyer up there, and talked a lot about just how to do this right, particularly in the laws that's going on. Also a board member for minorities for medical marijuana. So make sure that you are registered to hear from Jessica Gonzalez next week. If you have any other questions, please let us know. This replay will be put up on our YouTube page. Make sure that you are also donating if you can at marijuanajustice.org. You can cash app us too at Marijuana Justice. And really continue to support this work that's going on. I will tell you that there are not many folks that are focusing on the regulation pieces of these licenses, particularly y'all, like not actually specifically intentionally as a priority. It is only Marijuana Justice, as well as those medical folks too. So make sure that you're supporting us, make sure you're following and you're getting everyone you know in Virginia to follow us. Thank you so much to Akele Parnell for coming on one more time and all the hard work that's happening in Illinois. Do we have the link for the YouTube? Yes, we can drop that in the chat. You can also go to YouTube and just type in Marijuana Justice. We should come up, but don't worry, we'll drop that in the chat as well. Have you also visited our recent page? If you go to marijuanajustice.org, up at the top, you'll also see Legalize It Right. Hit that page and check out our website for the campaign where it goes over the 3 R's. We're really excited about some of the artwork that we're going to continue to put out, because even after we legalize it, after they pass it, this Legalize It Right campaign will continue to push on. As we've heard from Akele, that the work will not stop. It's going to be important that we now put our eyes to that licensing process. Thank you so much to Ozma, who has now put the YouTube link in the chat. Before we get out of here, Ozma, if there's anyone else, could you also just drop in that Legalize It Right link in the chat too? That would be great. No problem. Please subscribe to our YouTube page. We just put it out at the beginning of General Assembly. And let us know, are these CannaHours helpful? Did you learn something? Even after legalization, after General Assembly is over, we will not be having these weekly, but how often would you like to hear from us? And how else can we really reach out to the communities that you're working with to let them know what's happening and legalizing of marijuana, and really understanding how to repeal the prohibition, to stop the policing, and really ensure that we are involved. All right, y'all. Well, of course, thank you so much for that. The Legalize It Right link is in the chat. If you have any other questions, make sure that you hit us up on marijuanajustice.org. On social media, you can follow us at THC Justice Now. You've got the YouTube. Check out our bio on our Instagram. There's all sorts of stuff that you can catch up on. And that's really, if you want to register to testify, if you want to submit written comment, or if you just want to watch the live link and you don't know how to find it because the Virginia Legislative Information Services is hard to access. just visit the Marijuana Justice social media pages and you can find those links in the bios. So let us know if you have any more questions. Again, I'm Chelsea Higgs Wise. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you next week.